Thanks for joining us. We begin this news hour in Israel, where a court in Tel Aviv has ordered that a major nationwide strike must now end. Israel's largest trade union staged the protest, saying it wants to pressure the government of Benjamin Netanyahu into signing a Gaza ceasefire and captive release deal with Hamas. The action was called after the bodies of 6 Israeli captives were recovered from a tunnel in southern Gaza on Saturday. A Labour court accepted the government's petition that the strike was politically motivated. Hamda Salhout joins me here on set in Doha, and she's here, of course, because the Israeli government has prohibited us from reporting from Israel itself. Hamda, you know the country, you've worked there, you've reported there extensively. The courts may have ordered this strike to be over, but given the scale of the demonstrations we've seen, give us a sense of where public sentiment is right now.
Well, public sentiment, as we saw last night, was unprecedented, with nearly 300,000 demonstrators in Tel Aviv, 500,000 demonstrators across Israel. And today, there are large crowds, thousands of people in the streets. And the head of the labor union released a statement saying that he respects the decision by the court and that the strike itself was a show of solidarity, even though the court said it was politically motivated, that it was a show of solidarity among the Israeli public, that the release of the captives should supersede all. But then there was another statement from the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, who said that even though the strike is going to end, the protests need to continue, and they're calling and encouraging on people to still continue to take to the streets. And in fact, the head of the labor union is said to speak around 7 p.m. local time at a demonstration. He says that he's also going to continue protesting as well.
Has Benjamin Netanyahu actually addressed any of this unrest, or is he biding his time?
Well, look, there were some reports within Israeli media last night saying that Netanyahu was a little bit worried, and this is citing anonymous officials, of course, speaking to Israeli media. They said that he was worried about the size and scale of these protests. These are some of the largest demonstrations that Israel has seen. The last time we saw something of this kind of scale, this magnitude, even where the labor union had a strike as well, was around a year and a half ago when they were protesting a different issue. So there were reports that he was a little bit worried, but there hasn't been anything that's come from the office of the Israeli prime minister. But he has previously said that he's doing what he can to secure a deal, and that includes military pressure, that he would fight the war despite all of the international and domestic pressure that's coming his way. He would prosecute it however he saw fit. But this time, there's a little bit of a different sense within Israel, because these captives, according to Israeli intelligence, were alive just a few days ago. And had there been a ceasefire deal, the families say they would have been alive and back home.
All right, Hamda, many thanks for that. Hamda Salhout there. Right, we are getting some news in to us about a strike in Gaza. Hani Mahmoud is live in Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. Hani, what can you tell us?
Just couple minutes ago, an airstrike just struck the gate of the hospital. That's actually a few meters away from where we are standing here. Since early hours of this morning, the skies of the central area, mainly above the hospital, this hospital, was clouded with many of the drones. You can hear them in the background. And for the past few hours, we've been talking to each other that the dense presence of these attack drones is for a reason here. And just within the past couple minutes, huge airstrike that is right next to the gate of the hospital. We're getting now confirmed reports, judging from what I'm looking at right now, but because it's a massive explosion, the dust and the debris just covered main parts of the hospital. When I talk about next to the gate of the hospital, just the landscape of the area, this is a road that is at about 8 meters wide, and across from the gate there is a house that has been already bombed at the initial weeks of the war. It's been targeted again now. The debris and the dust all come to the courtyard of the hospital as we speak right now. We would be mourning of the dense presence of these drones, and we did not expect it to happen right at this time, but it did happen. As you can hear in the background, the buzz sound of these attack drones is still in the skies and still clouding the skies of the central area, mainly above the hospital. See, as you see from the frame of the camera, these are one of the injuries, a child who happened to be hit by a shrapnel. There's another one also being rushed inside the hospital, and this is from the flying shrapnels and debris as the explosion was quite intense. I'm not sure if you guys could hear that in the studio, but it was so deafening. It was so loud here.
Hani, we can most definitely hear the continual sound of drones above you, Israeli military drones. Are you suggesting it was one of those drones that carried out this specific strike? And do we know what the intended target was there?
Well, what we know so far, it's a house that has been already bombed. But the fact that it's not far from the hospital, this has already created a sense of intimidation, a sense of fear and concern as people, remember, within the past few days, right before the announcement of the pause in the fighting in the central area because of the vaccination campaign, people were literally told by the Israeli military as they received messages and they read the leaflets that were dropped by the Israeli army to go back to these blocks, 128, 129, 130. They're all next to each other, and they were told they are safe. Literally, the word safe was in those text messages, was in those leaflets, and people were told to get back to these areas. And now the explosion just took place, just shattered any sense of safety that remained to people. Also, it shattered any sense of trust in the narrative about the pauses in the fighting. As again, this is very similar to what the Israeli military has been doing in the past 10 months. It's full of lies, it's misleading, it's contradictory, it's fake. People are told to go to areas to avoid being bombed, and they get bombed and they get killed, they get maimed in the very particular areas and locations they were told to go to. We will keep monitoring the development of this story, but the fact it's happening without any prior warning whatsoever. This road next to the gate of the hospital is quite busy at this particular time of the day. It's more of like a rush hours. It's a marketplace here. People tend to leave their tents, tend to leave the areas where they evacuated, they have been evacuated in, and come to this road and particular streets leading to the gate of the hospital and buying and shop and restock from whatever is available. So it's really a busy hour, quite more of like a rush hour in the area. And what we're getting now, consistent with what I was saying, the street was full of hundreds of people, either those who are coming back to their homes, taking their belongings and taking the very road where the explosion happens, going back to the eastern part of Deir el-Balah city or the vicinity of the hospital when the explosion happens.
All right, Hani, many thanks for that update. We'll of course, come back to you as and when we get more information. Just to clarify, Hani and the rest of the team have been reporting on the rollout of polio vaccines, one of the centres there in Deir el-Balah. Just to repeat what we've just heard from Hani, what appears to have been a strike possibly carried out by an Israeli military drone on a target close to the gates of that hospital, as I say, on day 2 of the polio vaccine rollout, something that the Israeli military said they would provide a safe corridor to allow civilians to get to and to allow them to be vaccinated. Let's move on and speak to Ilan Pappe. He's an Israeli historian and professor at the University of Exeter. He's joining us from Chicago. Ilan, a very warm welcome to you. So you probably heard the panic, the fear, the pandemonium outside the hospital in Deir el-Balah. Many children across Gaza have been told that they could safely go and be vaccinated, receive their polio drops to avoid the mass spread of disease in Gaza. And now this strike. When it comes to hopes of a lasting ceasefire, establishing trust is vital, but it's massively in short supply when we see incidents like this.
Yes, indeed. And I'm afraid we've been there before, when supposedly safe zones for Palestinians in Gaza were bombed. And this keeps repeating itself. And this is part of the general picture that we are facing, which is an Israeli prime minister who is adamant in continuing as the situation of the war as he would see it, as long as he can until the next elections in Israel in 2026. And he would do everything possible to make sure that there is no conditions, no circumstances for ending the Israeli genocidal attack on Gaza. And I think the kind of cynical attack we have just heard about just momentarily is one indication that this kind of inhuman cynicism would be perpetrated again and again, I'm afraid, unless there is an external intervention that might have the ability to stop it.
Ilan, talking about interventions, while we are having this discussion, we're looking at live pictures from West Jerusalem, vast numbers of people still out on the street there, despite the Labour court ordering the end of the strike that was called by the trade union on the basis that it was politically motivated, said the court. How do you interpret that? Aren't all strikes inherently politically motivated?
Yes, of course they are. This is just the way that the legal, or those who represent the legal system in Israel are trying to navigate between their full understanding, and they already recognize that Netanyahu has breached almost every law in the book of laws of Israel on the one hand, and the fact that they depend on him to survive in their positions, whether it is the prosecutor, the chief prosecutor, or the legal advisor to the government. And therefore, this is just a play, this is a game, this is nothing to do with legality or illegality. This is a balance of power by which, until now at least, the base of Netanyahu, his coalition allies, and himself are still the ones who determine Israeli policies inside Israel and towards the Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and towards the north, and towards South Lebanon.
We're talking about pressure now from outside the country. We understand that the United States could be poised to offer a so-called take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum to Benjamin Netanyahu that could spell a possible end to US mediation efforts in bringing about a ceasefire. What might that potentially mean for Netanyahu if it happens?
Well, again, it's funny how we sort of think that we are hearing some dramatic news, where actually we see the repeat of the same news again and again. We were already in this point where the Americans said, what we are proposing now is take it or leave it. And then they came again and said, no, this time we really mean it's take it or leave it. And I'm afraid this is going to be the same. Netanyahu is going to reject the American proposal, whatever it is, because, as I said in my early answer, his main strategy is to continue the situation of the war, because he believes that's the only way that can ensure his political survival. He doesn't think that the Americans are in any position to really pose danger to his own position in the government, because we are 60 days before the elections. And therefore, this is all going to be, there's going to be a lot of talk, but very little action on the ground. And I'm afraid we need something far more drastic than an American proposal that tries to satisfy Netanyahu's demands that keep changing, because he doesn't want a deal and he doesn't want to end the fighting.
When you say something far more drastic is needed, what does that look like to you?
Well, definitely not what I heard from Kamala Harris in the Democratic convention a week ago here in Chicago. We need a position, if not by the Americans, at least by the Europeans, and at least by the European countries who already showed some conscientious position to treat Israel as a pariah state that commits a crime against humanity, namely genocide in Gaza. And that should be translated into sanctions, into stopping military support for Israel, financial support. But I'm afraid, and I have to be realistic, this is not going to happen in the next 60 days, or it won't come in the next 60 days from Washington. It just remains to be seen, is the world really run by the United States alone, or are there other powers that can change the balance of power on the ground in Gaza? Because the genocide continues, and as you have reported, it has now moved into the West Bank. So, and it won't stop by any internal dynamics in Israel. The only way to stop it is an international coordinated effort to make sure that Israel pays the price that is high enough to persuade its policymakers that it's time to stop the genocide.
Ilan Pappe, it's been a pleasure to have you on Al Jazeera. Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.